And here we are. Hi, guys, and welcome back to another week of Mindful Mastery, the emotional self care skills we all need sometimes when stress gets high and emotions strong. So, today I have a question for you. Can I ask you to put a here in the comment section if you're feeling just a little extra overwhelmed these days? And I mean super overwhelmed because more than the usual overwhelm of making decisions, right now we are making big decisions that can have really important consequences for the health of our families and our loved ones and ourselves. Whether you're on the front lines in the hospitals or you're going to the grocery store, we're all making these really big decisions that can have a different kind of a traumatic effect. And that's what we're going to talk about today. The good news is I am so excited that I have my personal psychologist guru, the therapy whisperer herself, Dr. Robyn Walser, here with us to talk about this different kind of trauma called moral injury. So if you've never heard of it before, you're not alone. We're going to ask Dr. Robyn a little bit about what's the difference between moral injury and the normal trauma that we kind of hear about. How does it show up differently? What does it look like? And is there something we can do to prevent it? Let's find out. So, without any further ado, we're going to bring her on. Hi, Dr. Welser. Thank you so much for joining us today in your completely overwhelmed schedule. We're thrilled to have you. Thank you.
No, thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be here today to chat and talk about not a very fun subject, but a very interesting subject of moral injury or moral distress.
Yeah, it's a little ironic. I'm like, hey, let's talk about moral injury. Holding things lightly. And maybe, information is power and can inform us. And hopefully, our conversation, we can learn a little bit. And maybe if people have questions, they can ask you questions. But let's start with the very fundamental question of what the heck is moral injury?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting concept that has come actually out of the fallout of war, where soldiers return home and they've experienced traumatic events, of course, but many of them also experience moral conflict within themselves as a result of being forced to make decisions that are really painful. Like, if I help this guy, maybe this person won't be able to be helped.
Right.
Or maybe they engage in behaviors that they wouldn't typically engage in the civilian world or non-war
Right.
times, things that actually are might be considered crimes or are more of a saving your life kind of thing, where you shoot into a crowd of people that are shooting back at you and you accidentally kill some innocent people.
Right.
Those are just examples of the kinds of things that can cause moral dilemmas. The moral injury itself, the way I'm conceptualizing it, and the way a group of us who've been working on it are conceptualizing it, is your response to the emotional reactions following a morally injurious event.
Right.
And so if you encounter a moral injurious event and then afterwards avoid, run away from, try to eliminate those emotional experiences, and it interferes with your functioning in daily life, then we would refer to that as a moral injury. I'm talking about soldiers, but it can stretch across a wide variety of events, including things like today in the time of COVID-19,
Right.
frontline providers having to make choices about, let's say, who gets a ventilator or not.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, but even trickles down from there. A friend of mine called me the other day that he took his senior citizen mom, who he pulled from the assisted living facility, to come live with him, and then he took her for a walk, and he couldn't sleep all night because he was worried that they got too close to people. And so it can happen in all this. So it's such a timely topic for your wonderful book that we're going to talk about, to be coming out. But it also for other groups that I've been speaking with, actually, for people who are making decisions when you're a caretaker. and helping, say, a spouse or a family member who's not well and making their day-to-day health decisions. It's such an important topic. Is there a way that that avoidance shows up differently at all for this kind of trauma reaction?
In some sense, yes. I mean, part of what you'll see in folks who are struggling with moral distress or morally distressing events is that there's shame and guilt are driving their behavior. Uh,
Mm.
it's beyond just about symptoms of avoidance, for instance, that you might see in PTSD,
Mm-hmm.
and, and more about I've done something wrong. I broke my own moral code. And now I'm living with the consequences of those memories or knowing that I did that. And you can end up in places where you're chastising yourself, evaluating yourself, even getting into really dark places about thinking of yourself as broken or evil or unworthy as a reflection of the actions that you took or the choices that you made inside of that moral dilemma.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It is the case that a lot of folks who experience moral injury itself, and I want to make that distinction between what were moral injury and moral distress,
Oh, do.
is that there are traumatic events happening. And so it's quite likely or more likely that someone has the fallout of trauma, such as PTSD or depression and other comorbid issues. But if you're working with somebody clinically, what they're reporting is they're having a lot of guilt and shame, and there's a particular memory that they're struggling with,
Okay, yeah.
or memories, I should say,
Mm-hmm.
that have to do with the choices that they've made. Now, moral distress is a concept that comes out of the like nursing and doctoring literature,
Oh,
and
interesting.
it's yeah. So and they're the two ideas are linked. So one sort of comes out of the literature looking at returning soldiers, and another one comes out of the literature looking at nursing decisions and having to make life and death
Yeah.
decisions inside of a hospital or something like that, and where you can have burnout and demoralization that come along with making these kinds of decisions. So it's kind of messy. It's not a diagnosis, right? Like moral
Right.
injury or moral distress are not diagnostic. They're more concepts that are unfolding and being defined and studied even as we speak. And so, but it certainly can create a lot of suffering for people.
Yeah, and such uh, it's beautifully encapsulated in a way, but also a place that's probably been missed, even though it's been studied, but it's probably not missed in that surface appraisal of things. And so timely that you're talking about. Is there so so many of us are faced with we're and people make the metaphor of this is a war, and then we're fractioned about should we go out, shouldn't we go out? Is so what is your research showing, or what does your book indicate that is there anything we can be doing to sort of prevent the impact of these day-to-day decisions, or and then we can talk about if you've already had to make them, how your book walks through. But is there anything preventative we can do?
Oh, I think that's a really tough question because
Yeah,
usually these kinds of moral dilemmas show up, right? And they're
yeah,
where we aren't typically like planning ahead for needing to make those kinds of life and death decisions. I think we operate inside of assumptions of safety and coherence and
right,
orderliness, right, most of the
yeah,
time. And so when we meet these dilemmas, we're usually startled by them, or they're presented to us in such a way that we're not sort of planning ahead for them.
hmm,
You know, I can imagine that nurses spend time on units where they have to make challenging decisions routinely.
yeah,
But right now, if you're on a unit where there are a lot of cases and you have a limited number of, let's say, equipment to life-saving equipment for an
right,
individual, and you have an administration that's saying you must work on the COVID unit, and you have a family at home that you could infect. right? Like there's all, like this whole situation
Ugh.
has brought out these moral questions and that you don't typically have to encounter. So it doesn't mean that you couldn't be experiencing it, the dilemma, in kind of an ongoing way, such as now. So I suppose there are some things to think about in terms of prevention. And one might be, if you're inside of a dilemma like we find ourselves now with COVID-19, that you share the responsibility of the kinds of decisions so that a group of you make the decision together and no individual person has to make a decision alone, a life and death decision, and that you take care of each other in different kinds of ways that are about recognizing and acknowledging that there is a moral process unfolding. It's not, one thing I should say is that this is not well studied. It's a relatively new area of study. And so there's still a lot to unpack about what might prevent moral injury. I mean, of course, I could say, don't get into a moral dilemma in the first place, but that's not possible in some of these situations.
Right. So, well, what if you could give us a little taste of what happens in your book and what process does it walk through people? I I know, and colleagues would know that what the six processes are, but for the layperson, what would your book help that person walk through?
Well, the thing I think that's unique to this book, and at least in terms of other self-help books that I've seen, so this is the Moral Injury Workbook, is that in each chapter, we're focusing on the social nature of morality.
Mm,
So it's not just, opening up to your emotional experience instead of avoiding it and hiding, but opening up to things like shame and guilt and really looking at how they inform you. We do not contextualize shame and guilt as problematic things that need to be reduced or gotten rid of.
right.
But in fact, we see them as informative and emotional experiences that tell you you're still human. And
Nice.
thank God you feel those things following a moral dilemma, because if you didn't, you would be a different kind of human being. And so we make lots of space for those things. And then we put it in the context of the social experience, because I'm going to feel shame in relationship to you or others around me,
Right.
not just by myself. And so the healing in the social context is also part of the work. And so we're looking at both, what do I need to open up to here, and how do I need to re-engage my social experience so that I can stay in the group that I've exited myself out of because of the moral injury.
Right. And the shame leads to the more avoidance. Shame says withdraw, hide, something's wrong with me. Right. So when you say, for lay people, when you say it contextualizes or puts it in the social context, can you give like a sort of case example or an example of what that would look like?
Yes. Yes. So let's suppose that you um, have broken your own moral code. For instance, I'm going to just give an example from the book.
Good.
You are the father of two children. Your wife asks you to take the children to school. You're tired, been working long hours. You do that, but you're really grouchy and grumpy. You get in the car and you respond to a text and get in a car accident. And
Mm,
one of your children dies as a result. So you can imagine in that space the sort of blame and heavy evaluation that a father might feel in that,
sure.
and really feel like he violated his values in multiple
Yeah.
places
Yeah.
in terms of not making sure his child was buckled in or something like that, or answering a text while driving in an accident leading to it. Like that one little choice
Yeah. For
created
sure.
a terrible outcome. And so um, he might begin to withdraw from the family there's his social network. Inside of that, I'm to blame for this terrible loss. And how could you love me? How
Right.
could even be a father to my other children if I can make these kinds of choices and that cause such terrible events? And so it's about, what do you think of me that I've done this, not just what do I think of me that I've done this.
And so, how is there a kind of a skill or exercise or a concept that's introduced that helps pull someone from that? Is that how do we give someone who has that internal moral conflict and distress a new experience?
Yeah, so the avoidance is just like in trauma, right? You pull
Yeah.
away, you hide, you exit yourself out of the social experience. And so
Mm-hmm.
the intervention here is that you open up to the shame and the guilt, let
Yeah.
yourself feel it, and not dictate hiding behavior or withdrawal from social interaction. And then the thing to do then is, how do I want to be? Let's take the same example with the other child that survived.
Right.
So the shame could drive you to pull away from being a father to that other child too,
Right.
because you're evaluating yourself so negatively. And the idea is, how do I get that myself back into a space where I can reconnect to my values and live well with this child as well? And know that I might have intrusive memories of what happened. I might have shame and guilt throughout my life, but it's no longer driving my choices. My values are driving my choices
Right.
in how I want to show up with myself and socially in the world.
So it seems like the values identification and connection is really, I mean, it's always a crux of our work, but here it's so essential. I also do have to say that I'm pleased in a way to hear that we're talking about allowing shame to be present, because you hear a lot these days on social media and oh, don't feel shame. I mean, I've actually had interviews on here where other psychologists are like, I just don't want to have the shame. I'm like, oh, hold on. Shame is equal opportunity emotion, and it's not that the shame is accurate or that that you should be ashamed. It's that we have to take the shame with us in order to keep walking and being the kind of person we want to be. So I am glad to hear you, who I love so much and respect so much, saying exactly that. I just want to give a little shout out to Lauren and Betsy for showing up. Thank you very much, ladies. And Susan Marie, nice to see any. Of course, if anyone has any questions for Robyn, we love questions. You take advantage, because apparently I stole her from several other meetings today.
Yeah, please feel free to ask me questions about this topic. It's a topic of interest, and we're studying it now, looking at moral injury in veterans, and if acceptance and commitment therapy is hopefully a good intervention for folks who are struggling. And it is the values-based work that feels so essential, as you mentioned. People inside of the injury will back away from their values, right? Inside of the shame. And remembering that shame makes you human is kind of an interesting place to go. I mean, shame has its own qualities in a lot of different ways. And, if I asked you or the people on the show here to say, tell me your most shameful moment right now, probably everybody would go, no,
I
right?
can
And
feel
like,
myself doing it. Yeah, I would love that for viewers to just like think about your most embarrassing, shameful experience, and then even imagine that I asked you to put it in the comment section. I would see my numbers drop on the screen. Yeah, shame is. Thank you, Brene Brown, for marketing shame for us, for doing the heavy lifting before this. But it is true. It's just even the word is so fused with the feeling. It's very true. Um, Go ahead.
of course, we don't want people to feel shame, right? I do
Right.
think it's
Just
a,
like I don't wish you to feel trauma or distress
yeah.
or any of the difficult emotions.
So it's the question of, when it arises, what is your relationship with it? And
Yeah.
how will you be with feelings of guilt and shame, and how will you let it inform you and influence you as you move forward?
I sometimes think shame is it's like DEFCON of emotions, right? If anger is sort of that forward facing one that we defer to protect us, at the end of that long hallway of emotions, behind the door at the end of the hallway is shame.
Yeah.
And when you have practiced and gotten flexible with going in and out of that, um, you get to you get a special prize in the video game of emotion regulation, I think.
Well, and I think too that if you think about it, it can be an effective social tool to promote cooperation, right? If
Yes,
you if you've got somebody inside of a social group who's doing a lot of selfish behavior,
yes.
then that can pull away from the group. So a little bit of selfish behavior inside a group is probably okay. I mean, you need to take care of yourself, but if you're sort of hoarding and pulling towards yourself, shame functions to like tame that behavior.
Yes.
So it's actually helpful in many ways, and we just need to make space for it, really. And
100%. And I think so, again, it goes back to this, oh, don't feel shame, don't shame me. Well, we have shame, like don't throw your feces in the street. And there's things that we don't do to keep a cohesive, to attend to the needs of other people. And I talk about how interpersonal interactions, it's, defer to you, then I take a little and I speak, and that is a foundation of effective social structures and relationships. I digress a little bit, but I think it's an important one. And so that's why we have to build that better relationship with shame. Is there anything in particular that you in your book, is there an exercise, or is there a way, or anything that you would suggest if people had something that they were grappling with now? If people are grappling with it, whether they're frontline workers or just trying to keep their family safe, is there anything that you would guide them in terms of a values exercise, or a willingness exercise that might help them practice a little bit?
sure, I mean, I do think that a values exercise is always useful. And one of my favorites, and you know this one, and I don't remember, frankly, if it's in the book or not. That's a little bit embarrassing, but there's plenty of values exercises in there. Is one that was developed by Kelly Wilson, where you reflect on a very sweet memory. And we've had the veterans that we work with do this, where they're reflecting on a sweet memory in their imagination, and then just looking at its textures and colors and what was happening that made it sweet or special. And then you'll almost always find a value that you care about inside of that.
Hmm.
And so once you've reflected on it, just to drop into what about this is so meaningful to me? What does it point to that I care about? And that can help you define at least some of your value or values in terms of, what matters to you in your life.
I love that. That was beautiful. Thank you. I'm thinking about some of the people I know are attending. So, if would that sweet memory be related to a person or situation that is sort of related to the trauma? So, if someone lost a child, or had an ill husband or something, would they? Because that could be a conflicted sweet memory, right?
Yes. So not necessarily. When I've asked clients to choose a sweet memory, I really want them to just pick on their own something that resonates with them as a sweet memory. And it
Yeah.
could be everything from something very small, like one of my sweet memories is, walking my dog in this with the sun setting and me being able to see all the little, dust and sparkles in the air, and just reminded me of my values about nature and being
Mm.
conservative when it comes to, honoring nature. And all the way up to very big and maybe even painful events like my mother's death, which is also a sweet memory. Not in the sense that, maybe it's more of a cherished memory, but in the sense of I was able to be there and meet her in this, amazing place where you're taking your last breath, and it points to, valuing in terms of love and connection and
Yeah.
belonging. And so
Yeah.
I just let the client pick, and because sometimes if they go right to the trauma, they're doing it imaginally, and they go right to the trauma, they lose the purpose of the exercise and
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
caught up in the traumatic memory.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's so, and I think values work can be it's challenging for clinicians, new clinicians it was the chapter in my book that I definitely struggled with.
Yeah.
Um, and for those listening, to find your values are your true north, right? Your values tell you why the pains of being human are worth it.
Mhm.
And so it's worthwhile for those of you watching to find your sweet moment. And then what you're describing to me sounds like a reverse engineering, right?
Yeah. Mm.
That you follow the feeling, and if it's sweet to you, there's something in there that's important to you, and do a little journal exercise or something to find what that importance is, because that will guide you in whether you should make a decision. Values always are the guidepost for difficult decision making. So
Correct.
that's what I was thinking about when we decided to talk about this, and when I was asking you, like, how do we prevent it? While we're never prepared, especially if you go to war, that there's going to be a moral decision to make. Um, what I'm guessing nurses can assume that they're going to have moral decisions right now, that frontline workers, do I go to work and feed my family and risk coming home and making them sick? That we kind of know that we're having these moral decisions right now.
Yeah.
So we might sort of extrapolate that if we get connected with our values, we can have a little more fluid decision making process, right?
I mean, that's a great idea. We just don't know. And
Right.
like we gotta, like, it could be that knowing your values actually is what creates the moral dilemma, right? So if
Yeah,
I'm in
good
touch
point.
with my values and I know that I want to honor life, and I have to make a decision that's about, you know, giving somebody a life-saving measure versus not,
Right.
how do I make that decision? And so it's a interest, like, I think we just don't know, like, what would be protective factor, and we just have to do more research to try to understand what happens when we make these kinds of moral decisions and land in a place where we feel injured by it. um, Certainly your values can guide you in that space, but what ends up happening is one of the values gets um, violated in a way that causes a different struggle. It's not, this
Yeah.
doesn't happen for everybody, right? Like, some people make these kinds of decisions or choices and they say, here's why I've done it. And I know that's not how I want to be morally, but I'm fine with the choice that I made at that point, given the circumstance. And other people don't. They struggle for years and years and years when they make those kinds of choices or participate in things where, they're answering a text while driving or shooting, a child that was in a group of people that was in the line of fire, right?
Right.
And so, there's all kinds of ways where, like, if you know your values, like, which one do I go here? Do I value my family,
Mm-hmm.
or do I value saving these people, or, like, it's just complicated, and I think we need more research to help us understand.
I think your body posture was exactly what I was thinking, and I was about to go like this too. That what we're describing is like a kind of a dialectical thinking situation where the challenge is to hold the both, right? That there was two difficult decisions,
Yeah.
right, to be made, and I had to, in a split second, choose which value was going to take priority.
Right.
Um,
Well,
so,
and so there's those kind, and there's also just direct violation of value where you might participated in a war crime and you chose to do it. So those are the kinds of things that are challenging.
yeah, yeah,
Because there's lots of,
fascinating.
yeah, no, it's really very interesting stuff, and I'm hopeful that we're going to learn something from our research and be able to say more about what is this and how do you treat it and what concepts are important here. I mean, we've written a number of articles that, if you've got any clinicians on the call, they're really great, and my colleagues, I should give a shout out to Jake Farnsworth and Lauren Borges, Sean Barnes, and Kent Drescher and Wyatt Evans. All of us have been working together to conceptualize and study the moral injury.
am seeing good numbers on our show up, so I'm guessing people know who you are. But tell us a little bit about your work and what you've been doing with the VAs and your research. And then later, I'd love to hear a little bit maybe about your personal connection to this work.
Sure, sure. So I have 3 jobs, which
Very
I'm like.
busy person here.
So I work at the National Center for PTSD, which is inside the VA, that I am not representing today, I should say. I'm representing my own perspective and my own sort of position on these kinds of things. And but inside the VA, I do research on moral injury and mindfulness. We're looking at the Mindfulness Coach, which is a free app on both Android and
All right.
iPhone, and recommend it highly to folks. We're looking at some studies there and moral injury. And then uh, outside the VA, I'm co-director at the Bay Area Trauma Recovery Clinic. And what we do there is serve populations who are in need and who've experienced trauma and can't get access to services. And so we're a low fee nonprofit. And the way we're able to provide services is we teach students how to do evidence-based psychotherapy for trauma, and then they do the treatment. And folks who wouldn't normally be able to get treatment can come in and get services. And then in the rest of my life, I'm consulting on acceptance and commitment therapy and training people and writing books and, you know, staying busy with, it seems like a list of 100 to-dos. Did I answer
And
the question? Yeah.
I think so. And Dr. Walser is also the therapist to the therapists. We all turn to Dr. Walser to stay both professional and personally straight.
It's a kind compliment. Thank you.
Oh, you know that I am your number one fan. I embarrass you all the time with it. Was there a personal reason that you were drawn to psychology that you'd like to share, feel comfortable sharing, or for like if there was young students watching, or something that would be like an inspirational story from your life?
I don't know if my story of being drawn to psychology is particularly inspirational. My story of being drawn to act is probably more inspirational.
Okay,
Which one would you like me to
the
tell?
inspirational one always.
So, I really knew nothing about acceptance and commitment therapy when I started my graduate training at University of Nevada, Reno. And I didn't know who Steve Hayes was, who's the developer of the intervention. I was there to do trauma work. I was working with,
Okay.
planning to work with Victoria Follett and just study trauma. And I went to a workshop by Steve in 1991, a long time ago,
Amazing.
and there was an exercise that he did during that workshop that just switched things like 180 degrees in terms of how I experienced myself and
Hmm.
how I related to my thoughts and my emotions, and had this sense of, it was one of, you see this from time to time with clients. Other clients, it's a little bit of a longer road. It's not 180, right? But that experience, and you might know this exercise, it's the child exercise inside ACT where you meet your child and
And you turned me around on that exercise.
yeah,
I mean, that was someday we should do that on a
and that changed everything. It changed the
right.
course of my work, and we do not need to hold our internal experience as broken, damaged, problematic. Because you have a trauma or a negative memory, or you have a thought that's, about low self-esteem or something like that, that you are so much more than that. And that, the vastness of you is amazing. And to really contact that and understand that, I think is pretty powerful. And that's what inspired me.
And funny, and it trickled down to me too. And I think once you're for us that are sort of embroiled in this, right? Then you see people still struggling with that, and it's still like, oh, wait, everyone needs to know this, right? So I think that people, and I'm sure people who are watching now who aren't that familiar, or even who've had a lot of therapy experience, they think that the goal is to get rid of the feeling, right? And that's traditionally, and sure, we all want to feel good and better. That is normal.
Mhm.
Where we get into the trouble, and what is the genius of Stephen Hayes's work and this therapy we're talking about, for those who don't know, acceptance and commitment therapy, which is what's called a third wave cognitive behavioral therapy, that we've shifted from this idea of get rid of it to an idea of embrace it, befriend it. And that is so counterintuitive that you have to just keep at it, keep at it, keep at it. Because as animals, we're going to want to avoid, suppress, and keep away the discomfort. I can,
Well, we've just really done an overextension of languaging, basically. Like our minds trying to figure out emotions as if they're math problems when they're not.
right,
And so, there's two ways of knowing the world, and this is a pretty important part of, or fundamental part of ACT, and that's knowing it with our minds versus knowing it with our experience. And I think, part of what happens is we spend so much time here that we dismiss or want to eliminate our experience or seek happiness. Perfectly fine. I mean, I like happiness. I'm a fan, right? I enjoy those kinds of things. But I also know that things like moral injury occur. And I also know that people struggle inside of, their concepts of the way the world should be and versus the way the world is. And,
right,
that assumption of safety, normality, coherence, orderliness creates a real dilemma for us because it is not like that. It is
yeah,
a world of
complexity,
disorderliness.
yeah, and
Out,
that's
out there, by the way, it's disorderly out there, and COVID-19 is a perfect example.
yeah,
And natural disasters are a perfect example. And it's disorderly in here, right? Like there's not a linear kind of this is the way I should feel and think deal,
mm-mm,
right? Like
exactly,
we're responding to and interacting from a biological and interactional place in our context. And so making lots of room for being human, I think is part of what we need to do. Like, you and I both have doggies, which some of you, by the way, may have heard a snore or two from the little girl lying next to me here. And they don't suffer the way we do
mm-mm,
because
right,
they're not
because
taught here
right,
about the way the world should be.
yeah. I keep
And,
thinking expectation management for the first time. It really, when we shift to this idea, and it's a hard shift, right? To shift to that the world is disorderly. We love certainty. I love to quote that research study where they took groups and gave them a choice. We're going to leave you here in a room to contemplate your thoughts, and you don't know what's going to happen, or we're going to put you in another room and we're just going to shock you periodically with an electric shock. And of course, most people chose the electric shock, right? So even if we're certain that it sucks, we're happier than uncertain, like, is it going to suck or is it going to be okay,
right.
right? So I talk a lot about,
Uncertainty is also a place where we need to show up and get present and
and
not know.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Dr. Walser, I cannot thank you enough. This has been amazing. If anyone has any questions, you've got like 30. This is your last chance.
Yeah. I'm
um,
quite happy to take it. Yeah.
but while we wait for that, because there is a little delay on Facebook, when does the book come out? I know it's on pre-order
So
now on Amazon, right?
you can pre-order on Amazon now. And I believe there is a way to at least get parts and pieces of it if you go to New Harbinger, because they're trying to release some sections early because of
Great.
COVID-19.
So at newharbinger.com, great.
Yeah.
And all of this, I'll put all this information in the show notes, everybody. Um,
Yeah,
Good.
I'll send you some more because it's supposed to come out July 1, but I think they're trying to make
That
parts
would
of it
be smart.
available before then.
Nice. As soon as we know, we'll put it in the show notes. Thank you. Betsy says that she found this very inspiring. I hope you found it helpful, Betsy. And we couldn't have been happier to have Dr. Robyn Walser, the expert of experts in trauma, and her whole team that worked on this work. We can't wait to read the book. Thank you, Robyn. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you
And
for having me.
thanks, everyone. Have a great week and may you be well.